Wow, we have an enthusiastic group here today, and we're thrilled to see that. But we're being live streamed, so you're all on camera now, so let's get started. As chair of the Committee on Teaching about the United Nations and conference chair, I'd like to welcome you to CTAUN's 2020 conference, War No More. And here on behalf of the UN is Undersecretary General Virginia Gamba, who is also the Secretary General's representative for Children and Armed Conflict. Virginia, they're yours.
Thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I'm honored to be here today to address educators. We all know the importance, but also the power of education in building solid foundations for a culture of peace. I would like to thank the Committee on Teaching about the United Nations for this opportunity. The themes of today's event, War No More, is a timely call for action as the United Nations is about to celebrate its 75th anniversary. This anniversary should not only be an occasion to look back at our collective achievements, it should be seized as an opportunity to shape the next 75 years and ensure that together we put all the necessary efforts to end and prevent wars. In my role as the United Nations Special Representative of the Secretary General for Children and Armed Conflict, I advocate for the rights and the protection of boys and girls affected by war. My mandate was created over 20 years ago following the Grassa-Machel study on the impact of conflict on children in 1996. One of her main conclusions was that the most vulnerable in times of war are children. In today's conflicts, boys and girls are exposed to unimaginable violence. Tens of thousands of children are killed, maimed, forcibly recruited, used, abused, violated, detained. Children are separated from their families and communities, denied access to education, healthcare, or life-saving assistance, and their future development is really hindered. My office is mandated by the Security Council to monitor and report on the 6 worst types of violations facing these children: recruitment and use, killing and maiming, sexual violence, abduction, attacks on schools and hospitals, and the denial of humanitarian assistance. The last 12 months have been really intense for the Children and Armed Conflict mandate. I visited the Central African Republic, Mali, Somalia, Saudi Arabia, Thailand, Myanmar, South Sudan, Senegal, and Kenya, among many other countries. I also attended important conferences such as the Conference on the Safe Schools Declaration in Palma de Mallorca in Spain. This engagement in my travels, which was initiated and supported by our child protection colleagues on the ground, which we call the CAC, Country Task Forces on Monitoring and Reporting on the 6 grave violations, in 20 situations that we cover, has really led to several important achievements, including the release of 13,600 children in last year alone from a situation of armed conflict. And the way one does that is through interventions such as the development and signature of action plans with parties listed as having perpetrated these violations. Again, in the last 12 months, we've signed almost 12 of these action plans, which has led to the immediate release of children. Ladies and gentlemen, the Secretary General has established that early action on preventing violent conflict is a priority of his mandate. Prevention efforts are also particularly important to ensure that children are not put at risk. The Security Council, in its Resolution 2427, put a strong emphasis on the issue of prevention of violations against children, particularly in a regional context. To this end, To this end, I presented prevention plans and ideas for regional action in discussions with the African Union in Ethiopia, the European Parliament in Brussels, and other regional bodies. Focusing on prevention means that we need to provide meaningful and sustainable options for children freed from armed groups or armed forces. This implies sustainable reintegration services to children formerly associated with armed forces and groups to help them rebuild their lives. My office, together with UNICEF, has launched, supported by countries such as South Korea, has launched the Global Coalition for Reintegration of Child Soldiers. And we're working with our partners to ensure that appropriate funding and expertise are available, and every single child that is released can benefit from complete and sustainable reintegration programs. In reinforcing reintegration concepts and results, it is best to consult with the children themselves. I have talked to many of these conflict-affected children and have asked them what it would take to break the cycle of violence in their young lives. Overwhelmingly, they replied that education and solidarity are the two key elements that can provide change for them. Children not only need but want education, and they do not wish to be compartmentalized or stigmatized just because they were denied education early on in life or they were forced to associate with parties to an armed conflict. We are failing these children by not providing tailor-made education initiatives to fit their needs and give them a chance to have a real future, the opportunities in education that most children of their same age around the world enjoy today. Ladies and gentlemen, as we look ahead, we must acknowledge the potential of our collective efforts for the prevention of violations against children. And yet the single most important action that we can take to stop violations is to stop the war. We need to promote peace processes. It is fundamental to allow for education to take root and a culture of peace to come forth. At the same time, the peace process itself must have a place for children. Here, my office has just launched the practical guidance for mediators so that they can include child protection and orderly release and reintegration of affected children in and during their negotiations. Thinking of children when one is thinking of peace is fundamental. Children should not be just a mopping up exercise that can start only when peace is established. Their needs and wants should motivate parties to seek peace and should be considered of primary importance by all facilitators of peace, dialogues and processes. There are many layers to peace. There is political peace that can allow for development, post-conflict reconstruction, justice, and reconciliation to begin to prosper. But sometimes there is an individual peace, which can occur when children are released from being used and abused by, in, and for war. And they are given the opportunity to recover and reintegrate with society. These children must be provided with alternatives to violence through the establishment of well-funded, long-term reintegration processes that offer full education opportunities and not just skills and vocational training. The latter will earn a livelihood, but the former provides a future full of hope and opportunities. This is where you come in. Educators, but also children and young people, some of them your own students, can have a real impact and tangibly support conflict-affected boys and girls everywhere. As educators, you can teach about how children are affected by war, talk about ways to better protect them. We have launched last year a global campaign called ACT to protect children affected by armed conflict. This campaign has already started, catalyzing real changes in the lives of children, and I encourage you and your students to join this campaign. Communicating how similar the children of the world are is also fundamental to generate better understanding with your students. Through your teachings, you can become ambassadors for the rights of children. You can turn around peer pressure so it becomes peer support, child to child, country to country. We can do this. We can do this through education. We all have a role to play in ending and preventing grave violations against children. These boys and girls count on us, on you, to get the protection and support they desperately need. Join us and act to protect children affected by conflict. Thank you.
And thank you so very much, Virginia, for offering these very important words of encouragement and need to all of us. And by the way, she's leaving for Afghanistan later today. She's off again.
Yeah,
Thank you. In addition, it's our honor to have the Permanent Mission of the Republic of Korea to the UN as our co-sponsor. We are very happy to be working with them and their associates here at the mission. And here is Ambassador Cho, who very much wants to welcome you also. Ambassador Cho.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Anne-Marie Carlson, and USG for Children in Armed Conflict, Virginia Gamba, colleagues, dear friends, particularly young students who are gathered here. I warmly welcome each and every one of you to this important and very timely conference. I'd also like to commend the CTAUN for convening today's conference on this very critical issue. Madam Chair, 75 years ago, the founders of the United Nations came together to sign the UN Charter, which enshrines the strong collective commitment to save future generations from the scourge of war. Well, as Madam Gamba has talked much about, the important issue of children in conflict, I would rather focus on the situation on the Korean Peninsula. Actually, the Republic of Korea is a country whose very existence is a living testament to war no more. We experienced the horrors of war in the 1950s, which has left Korea divided, still divided, creating hundreds of thousands of separated families. This sad history resulted in making Korea one of the strongest advocates of peace. And this is the reason why the Korean mission is supporting you, Madam Chair. Thank you. As the United Nations General Assembly, at the General Assembly in September last year, President Moon of Korea declared the three principles of peace on the Korean Peninsula: zero tolerance for war, a mutual security guarantee between the South and the North, and co-prosperity. Based on these guiding principles, he proposed transforming the demilitarized zone across the midriff of the Korean Peninsula, once an arena of confrontation, into an international peace zone. It's an ambitious goal, the vision of the leader. To continue our journey toward establishing permanent peace on the Korean Peninsula, it is vital to receive the support of the international community through concerted action and unity. In fact, we have invited Madam Anne-Marie Carlson and her entourage to our mission about a month ago to discuss the issue as well. Well, I've talked something about Korea, but the importance of peace and the important issue of teaching our young generation about the importance of peace is not limited to Korea. It's a worldwide important thing. In that context, let me quote Mr. Federico Meyer, an harbinger of peace education, who said, "Peace is possible for life at all stages, and it is up to man, now it should be changed up to men and women, to choose his and her destiny or to suffer from the horror of war," unquote. I believe genuine peace stems from the minds of the people. This is why peace education plays a pivotal role in united efforts toward peace. I thank each and every one of you for your participation. Lastly, I would like to take this opportunity to reaffirm Korea's commitment to creating peace together with all of you in paving the way for the future we want. Thank you, Madam.
And thank you so much, Ambassador Cho. And we at CTAUN so much value this partnership with your mission and hope we can go much further with that too. Thank you again. Our conference day consists of conversations between key leaders in their respective fields, along with presentations of CTAUN awards and some special videos. These will be interspersed with the conversations occurring on the front platforms set up here in front of the dais, followed by the various award presentations and videos as the interludes between. And you can certainly see how that's going to work out for us today on our program. Your conference folders have some necessary items for the day: the program, speakers' bios, info fair exhibits list, UN bookshop coupon, and evaluation form. Plus, we've included a recommended resources packet filled with a lot of information we think you should have, and a copy of the Katie Kollwitz War Never Again poster for you. Our site is the UN's beautiful Trusteeship Council chamber, designed by Denmark, with a statue of a girl with arms upraised and the bird hovering above with its outspread wings, symbolizing mankind, I should say womankind too, and hope. And today we filled this room to its capacity of 673. And look around, you'll see a very filled, busy room with so many, many great participants. Recently, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres upheld the UN Charter, the founding treaty of the UN, now 75 years since its adoption. Signed in June 1945, it promised to save future generations from the devastation of war. He ended his special address to the Security Council with the following: "War is never inevitable. It is a matter of choice, and often it is the product of easy miscalculation. And peace, too, is never inevitable. It is the product of hard work, and we must never take it for granted." Our program today and the superb group of speakers assembled here intend to provide you with some of the fascinating history, current efforts in place to advance peace, along with challenges for the future. Since we've provided access to our speakers' bios on our CTAUN website, www.teachun.org, and here also in your conference folders, we are not duplicating that here today. We want our speakers to have as much time as possible. So I now turn the conference over to them, beginning with the first conversation on creating peace. Will our speakers please come up here in the front. But let's move over to the side.
Thank you so much. We are delighted to be here. Also delighted to see all of the editing that needs to be done about the previous mankind that ran everything. Now it's mankind and womankind. Thank you so much for making those additions, because that, clearly is what we're talking about this morning, the addition of women to the concept of keeping the peace, ending wars, sustaining peace, as women participating in every aspect of it. I want to thank Undersecretary Virginia Gamba, Ambassador Cho, and Anne-Marie Carlson, the chair, for and I want to point out the wonderful peacemaker Cora Weiss, too. It only... She is our true-born leader. It only took her about 30 emails to get us all sorted out, but she managed to get us all here and in our chairs, and we are delighted to be here. My name is Carol Jenkins, and I am co-president and CEO of the ERA Coalition here in the United States. We represent about 100 national and local organizations working to amend the Constitution of the United States. As you may know, when the Constitution was written, women were deliberately left out of it. And it's taken us almost 100 years to try to fix that, from 1923, when Alice Paul first introduced this into Congress. But we want to assure you that the United States wants to catch up with so many of the other countries of the world who've done this with terrific results. So there's no reason that we can't do it here. It is now my pleasure to introduce a couple of friends of mine, women I have admired from up close, and certainly the work they've done in the distance. Gloria Steinem is the esteemed American writer and activist, recipient of this country's highest civilian honor, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, bestowed by President Obama. Among her peacekeeping work, leading a delegation of women to the DMZ zone, separating South and North Korea, urging reconciliation. Lema Bowie is the recipient of the Nobel Peace Award, just a small honor for... It's not every day you can say, and here's the winner of the Nobel Peace Award, right? But we have her here. And her work in making sure that the war in Liberia came to a close and that women were safe and that they could participate in their country and even lead their country. She also serves as executive director of the Women, Peace, and Security Program at the Earth Institute at Columbia University. Thank you both so much for being with us today. Gloria, why don't you start? Each participant has a few minutes, I think it's exactly 5, to present your experience. So please go right ahead, Gloria Steinem.
Dear friends, can you hear me? Is this on? Okay. I'm so glad to see you, especially the young ones. I just had to wait for some of my friends to be born. I'm so glad you're here. I am not here to say that women are more peaceful than men, just that gender roles have deeply convinced many men that they have to prove their masculinity. Sometimes I think the world is divided into two kinds of people: those who divide people into two kinds of people and those who don't. But this wasn't always true. We are here today on Mannahatta Island. And before patriarchal and monotheistic Europeans showed up and killed 90% of the inhabitants, languages had no gender, no he or she, and governing was based on circles of consensus, and a council of grandmothers decided when to go to war and when to make peace. Yet since the beginning of patriarchy, And patriarchy means, of course, controlling reproduction and therefore controlling the bodies of women, which itself requires violence or the threat of violence. There is so much violence against females, from female infanticide to domestic and sexualized violence in war zones, that for the first time that we know of now, there are fewer females than males on spaceship Earth. And the human race is a bird with two wings. If one is broken, it cannot fly. All of us on spaceship Earth, women and men, have an interest in ending war as an institution, as an acceptable way of solving any conflict ever. But women are often the leaders of this effort because we don't have our masculinity to prove. For instance, I'm here at the invitation of Cora Weiss, who has been, as you know, a peace advocate for at least half a century, and was the innovator of Security Council 1325 that called for women and gender perspectives at all peace tables. Though mostly this has not yet been tried, women have sometimes managed to solve unsolvable conflicts on our own. Think of Mairead Maguire, one of the two Irish women who founded the Peace People movement in a divided Ireland of the 1970s. They were successful enough to win the Nobel Prize. And you've already met my friend Lema, who won the Nobel Prize for leading women in ending the brutal civil war in Liberia. 5 years ago, Lema, Mairead, Cora, and I were 4 of the 30 women peace activists from 15 countries who walked across the DMZ between North and South Korea. We got called a lot of names, from naive forward. But we did dramatize the need to end the world's longest war and a war zone full of landmines, still, as you have heard, dividing families. Since then, some of that land has been demined. The leaders of North and South have met to shake hands. And even Donald Trump, who probably couldn't find North Korea on a map, is trying to take credit for peace efforts. More important, there are 40 co-sponsors of House Resolution 152 that finally will end the Korean War, this longest war. Make sure that your congressional representatives are supporting House Resolution 152. In my experience, there are ways that women lead peace efforts. We keep raising possibilities for peace in the halls of power, from boardrooms to here in the UN. We just start the peace process anyway by talking to women especially, but also to children and men who are enemies or otherwise forbidden from talking. And probably more basic than either of those, we object to violence against ourselves as females. It turns out that by all UN statistics, and as documented in a book called Sex and World Peace by Valerie Hudson, the most reliable determinant of whether a nation is violent within itself or whether it will be willing to use military violence against another country is not poverty, access to natural resources, not religion, not even degree of democracy. It is violence against females. This is not because female life is any more valuable than male life. It is not. But it's because dominance of females is the first form of violence that we may see even in our own families and neighborhoods. And it makes us believe that one group is born to dominate another, or that domination and hierarchy are an inevitable part of human nature. Look at terrorist groups. They are always very gender polarized. Look at more peaceful and democratic societies. They are the least gender polarized. We will never have democratic countries until we have democratic families. And we are way more likely to have nations without war if we grow up in families and cultures in which men are not at war against women, and one race or caste or religion is not at war against another. This is not... This is not rocket science. It means such simple things as listening as much as you talk, sitting in circles instead of in hierarchies, and celebrating the fact that we learn from difference, not sameness. Peace is like a tree. It doesn't grow from the top down. It grows from the bottom up. So honor, respect, and pressure the UN, but don't wait for the UN. Just do it.
Great. Lema, thank you.
This is unfair. I should have been first. So I'll start with two stories I think that is appropriate for today. So in June of 2012, I read an article about a baby that was a farmer who had lost his dog. And he went to search for his dog. And whilst they were searching, they found this dog hover over something. And they tried to call the dog. It refused to move. So the search party decided to go and investigate. And this dog was lying on top of a day-old baby. And they took the baby. He was alive. And they took the dog. I'm one of those people who read stories and read the comments, even if it's about myself. That's to show you the level of my insanity. And under the comment portion, someone wrote something that struck me. How is it that our world has gotten so bad that even the dogs have more humanity than humans? I was on a flight coming back, and this flight attendant was my jewelry. He wanted to know something. We started talking, and he wanted to know what I did for work. And I said, I'm a peace activist. He said, oh, one of those zealous people that think our world will get any better. And we talked and talked and talked, and as I was leaving, he said, I wish you luck in all of your venture, but I've given up on this world. This, in my opinion, happens when we get to a place where we normalize violence, we normalize injustice, and when good has become evil and evil has become good. In my native Liberia, war was normalized for over 14 years. It started when I was 17 up until I was 31. And it's that normalization of war that led us to a place where a group of us women decided we wanted to change the tide. And so we stepped out to work for peace. The moment that we're sharing in this space is a moment that is calling for no more war. It's a moment that is calling for no more trouble. But have we ever sat to ask ourselves, Gloria alluded to it a bit, what is the genesis of war? I was at the Naval War College and I asked the soldiers there, would they take arms and kill their people? And the answer was a resounding no, because their needs are met. They have hope. In most of our societies where wars are raging, you can't even talk about hope. The stark reality of a lot of these people is that they can't even find their basic human security needs. And it makes it easy for them to pick up arms based on promises from politicians that it's going to get better. So when we talk about no more war, it's important for us to begin, as we're imagining a future of no more war, let's begin to imagine a future of a culture of peace. Let's begin to imagine a future of our collective humanity. I feel like if we all begin to see each other as the same, where we don't encourage or we don't sit by and allow cages for others based on the texture of their skin or the way they speak, when we don't agree for women and men to have the kind of difference or the suppression and oppression of women in a way that is done. So for us to begin to imagine no more war, let's begin to imagine a world of social and economic equality between men and women. Let's begin to imagine a world where racism is no more. Let's begin to imagine a world where our political system is not conducted in a way where winner takes it all and losers are left scrambling and suffering again. Let's begin to imagine a world, including fathers in this room, where if you have women who you're paying less, imagine a world where if it was your daughter, how would you want to conduct that? The essence of no more war is not something that will be achieved in the corridors of the UN. If you check the impact of wars, the number of people who are impacted by wars are far more than those who wage war. And we are going through everything that we're going through in this world because we have a lot of good people, including in this room, who have refused to stand up for peace. And once we refuse to get our hands dirty in small ways and big ways, we leave room for tyranny and terror to reign. As we strive for no more war, the Undersecretary General talked about education, and we can only guide the next generation of leaders in this room to a world of no more war through our actions and through our policies and the way we conduct ourselves. When we protested in Liberia, we had a common slogan: peace, yes; war, never again. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. Such moving and provocative comments about positioning women, giving them their power. The UN women, in their statistics, talked about last year, 2019, 132 million people who were seeking refuge from war, 35 million women who needed some sort of sexual reproductive emergency care. We were talking about the children earlier today. You talk about using our agency and acting to stop it, but do we still have the mechanisms to do it? What are those mechanisms? Because I could vouch that every single person in this room would want to say no more war, let's have peace forever. But then if we tell them what exactly they can do to make that happen, what are the tools that you would say need to be utilized?
So let me just go back to young people. A few years ago, and I'm going to pick on the Americans a bit in this room. It's very interesting to see how everyone thinks that Trump is America's problem. I think what Trump did was to bring the dirt that was already here to the fore and made people bold enough to do what they're doing now. Years ago, I traveled to places as a guest of the Lutheran Church, and some of the things, some of the racism that I saw is something that is still happening today. And so when there was this Muslim ban, there was a lot of people going to the airports to get people in.
The Muslim ban.
Yes. And so I was on the campus of a university, a very big university, with a lot of diversity. And the students were hyped up about going to the airports. And in that gathering, I asked them, you have foreign students on campus, yes. How many of you have invited these students into your room for a meal? It's easy to say, I'm going to challenge a structure. And it's very difficult to say, I'm going to be welcoming. Because some of the foreign students that I had interacted with from Pakistan and those places that were impacted have said, I've been on this campus and not a single person have invited me for a meal or have even spoken to me. And I think when we're talking about peace, it's not just us going out there and doing the big things, protesting governments. Before you protest government, walk your talk. How are you welcoming to those next to you?
Yeah, I certainly agree. I mean, it starts in the family. If there is violence and dominance and hierarchy in the family, there is violence and dominance and hierarchy in society. And that is a place where we can all be active. And our schools and our streets, it is something, peace is something we do every day. It's not something big and abstract. And the rules, the guidelines are kind of simple, really. I mean, just think about daily democracy. Do try, if you're shy, try speaking as much as you listen. And if you tend to talk a lot, try listening as much as you speak. I mean, it is the daily organic things that we do, and that we have the courage to speak up, to say "me too," to say we see what's going on, we disapprove, and we won't continue what the imbalance is.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about, since the work that I do here is amending our Constitution, which we feel has created the fact that women are not in it. And the only thing we're trying to add to it is a statement that says you cannot discriminate based on sex. That's all it says. And it's taken us 100 years to get that. But what it has created is this feeling of many girls and women of being a second-class citizen in this country. So I wanted to ask you, we think that the way to fix that is to amend, give us this 28th Amendment. The Constitution has been amended 27 times before to fix things that were missing. But in your experience, in countries where you've seen that it has been written down, it has been added to the Constitution, how much of a difference does it really make, do you think?
Well, having it documented is a good thing, but sometimes paper is not enough. How is it translated into everyday actions, into everyday things and I think there's been a big shift in our world today when it comes to women's rights. And I think if we have the documents, it's good, but because there are places where even in this country, people will have no access to those documents to read, to even know that it is law now that a woman can do this. So how would you popularize it for them to know it? In our country, we have one of the strongest rape laws in all of West Africa. It's non-bailable. Once you're accused of rape, you go to prison. It's 12 to life. There's been a lot of conversations about bringing it down. But you still have cases in different parts of communities where families will settle rape based on divine justice. I leave mine to God. Or people just don't know that there is a law. So popularizing is one of it, taking it into the community. But just to say we've amended the Constitution and girls they have the right now, you'll be fooling yourself, because there will also be pushbacks from various parts of society. So you have to prepare for all of those things.
Maybe put the Constitution of your own on your family door, okay? I mean, women have frequently got to be whole people by being active outside the home, and men get to be whole people by being active inside the home. And we are all whole people, right? So until men are raising children, as much as women are raising children, men won't develop the empathy and sense of connection and so on that comes with raising children. So maybe we should just put a Constitution on our front door.
I like that idea, of course, with the 28th Amendment on it. Lema, you've written a very moving, insightful article that's titled "Peace is Not Enough." So that we all in this room want peace, and we are acting for no war. We want peace, but then, as you were alluding to, there needs to be more than just the ceasing of bombs dropping. It's the reconstruction, or in some cases, construction of a society that is equal. Can you talk a bit about that?
Well, I think when we think about peace, we think about kumbaya. We think about, there is nowhere where you have in a sentence peace and radical. Peace is neat, peace is clean, peace is all of that. But peace should be radical transformation. I'll give an example. Immediately after the fall of Gaddafi, I was in Libya, and I was engaging with over 100 young people. And, okay, so technically Gaddafi is gone, NATO is out, so there was peace in the formal sense of the word. So I'm in this room with this group of young people, and I asked these young boys, where do you see, or all of them, where do you see yourself in the next 5 years? And there was this laughter in the room. I thought I had wardrobe malfunction. And then they said, Miss Lima, why would you ask us 5 years? We don't even see ourselves in the next 30 minutes. Because there was absolutely no hope. No hope for basic needs, no hope for a future. They couldn't see themselves anywhere. So in that instance, if you look at the word, if you went to a NATO operative or they will say, oh, we've delivered peace to Libya. But that was not peace. It was taking out a dictator and living in hopelessness and all of the remnants of suppression and oppression that people had to deal with. So over time, when we are talking about peace, it's about radical transformation. Those things that used to exist, how do we extract them? How do we work to transform communities so that people are able not to think or even imagine going back to war? Until we see those things, President Sirleaf and Elizabeth Wren, and I know we're out of time, in their article, Women, War, and Peace, said, in one quote, the impact of conflict on women's lives is a reflection of the interaction during peacetime, something that Gloria said. So all of the injustices that happened in Libya prior to that war, in peacetime, those things need to be taken out. 5, 10 years, 6, 7 years later, since the fall of Gaddafi, Libya has gotten worse than it was before. And so if that kind of peace translates into horrible lifestyle for people, we need to begin to define peace in a different way.
Excellent. I want to be mindful of the time commitment. Do we have time for a question or two from the audience? We don't, because you guys were so powerful, and I think ended on a terrific note of understanding what you replace in the society when the bombs stop dropping. What are you replacing it with? And peace is not enough. It requires a reorganization of a society. Gloria Steinem and Lema Gwowi, thank you so much for being with us.
I'd like to invite Cora Weiss to please come up.
We need you here.
Surprise, surprise. Good morning. This is so wonderful. I love to surprise people, especially Cora, who is very difficult to put one over on her. In 1996, the Committee on Teaching About the UN was founded by two women, Barbara M. Walker and Sally Swing Shelley. And these two extraordinary women who were firmly committed to education, global citizenship, and the United Nations created CTAUN. Sadly, in March of 2016, 10 years after Sally Swing Shelley, Barbara Walker passed away. And in honor of her memory, we decided that we would like to have the first CTAUN Global Citizen Award, and it was presented in 2017. The person selected this year, Cora Weiss, is a person who is an integral part of CTAUN. She has devoted her whole life to peace and education, serves as CTAUN honorary patron, but then there's so much more to Cora. Let me share with you just a few tidbits about her extraordinary life as well. Cora was a volunteer teacher for a gifted program at PS 126 in Harlem in the 60s. There, she introduced her students to the United Nations and ambassadors from African countries which were becoming independent. In the 60s, she also worked with Women Strike for Peace, collecting children's baby teeth to be tested for the presence of strontium-90, the lethal ingredient in atomic bombs. In the anti-war movement, she brought home 3 American Vietnam prisoners of war. Actually, we have sitting in the audience today Tom Wilbur, who is the son of a former Vietnam POW, whose father Cora had visited during that time. She is one of a handful of civil society women who drafted Security Council 1325, which was unanimously adopted by the Security Council in 2000 and is international law, as we heard earlier. Cora Weiss is the president of the Hague Appeal for Peace and is the United Nations representative of the International Peace Bureau. Cora Weiss, activist for civil rights, human rights, women's empowerment, proud mother and grandmother, and peace education advocate. Need I also mention that she too has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize this year for the 5th time. In my many conversations with Cora, especially putting this conference together, she sometimes ends her conversation with, "You, my dear, are what's right with this world." But today, I say to you and everyone with us, Cora Weiss, you are what's right with this world. And on behalf of CTAUN, I would like to present to you our CTAUN Global Citizen Award. It's a bit heavy, and the world is detachable, so she can look at different continents as she wishes. And here we go. You're welcome.
My view of the future is that each one of you gets one of these in your lifetime. Thank you, Gloria. Thank you, Lema. Thank you, Carol. That was over the top. You're terrific. So, as my late mother-in-law used to say, I'm overwhelmed. I loved Barbara Walker. She used to poke her head into my office every time she was in the building across the street. She would have been thrilled that we're here, gathered together, to honor the UN and put an end to war. She would be over the moon if we would abolish one existential threat to humankind, nuclear bombs, and reverse the other existential threat, the climate crisis. They are the apocalyptic twins. So do you know what would make me happy?
Tell us.
That each of us gathered here or watching online would do one thing in our life so that our daughter's granddaughter would wake up one morning and, in the words of the poet Eve Merriam, would ask, "Mommy, what is war?"
Thank you. Thank you.
Do you want to say this?
Okay. I'd like to also mention War No More, http://webtv.un.org. If you have anyone at home who would like to join in and watch this today, this is the link. All right, thank you, and congratulations, Cora. We're so excited for you. She's taking the world with her.
On? Hello? All right, there we go. Good morning. First of all, I'd like to thank the Permanent Mission of the Republic of Korea for co-sponsoring this event and the Committee on Teaching about the UN, especially at this time and this day and age in where not many people believe in the UN, the work the UN does, and where it seems to be more polarized than ever next door in the Security Council. I'm joined by a very well-established panel. I'm not going to go through their bios. You have them all with you. To my immediate right, we have Eleonora and Michael and Adora. And I would like to begin with Eleonora, who will be speaking on AI and the changing nature of conflict. Eleonora, please.
So, good morning. It's an extreme pleasure to be in your company. What I wanted to start with is this notion that we don't assemble today because we agree, look alike, are socially compatible or wish to fuse together, but because we are brought by complex, divisive matters of concern. And one of these concerns is the fact that the nature of conflict is changing under the combination of powerful dual-use technologies, such as the combination of AI, cyber, and biotechnologies. And so advances in AI and converging technologies have the potential to make attacks more precise to the level of biometrics, populations biometrics, and targeted hate speech, but also more deadly, producing security events, black swans with bio and chemical consequences. And these attacks are also more invasive in our everyday lives because they are waged inside our lucrative cyber networks and the boundaries of our smart cities. So they are waged inside civilian infrastructures. And indeed, civilians, including vulnerable populations in the global south, are increasingly targeted. Now let me try to unpack with you in a few minutes the tech shifts that are guiding the evolution of conflicts. And they can be summarized in three concepts. The first one is what I call AI convergence. So a new phase where AI optimizes the data that are part of our physical, digital, and biological lives. And relying on this predictive intelligence, AI can then automate other technologies, from cyber and biotech to medical devices, drone swarms, and 3D printing. This form of AI convergence is augmenting our capacities to solve complex problems, from precision medicines, pandemics, food security, as well as hate speech and conflict prevention. But it is also drastically expanding the attack surface in conflicts to include our cyber networks and smart cities, with the potential to wage cyber attacks that target financial markets, hospitals, and elections, and weaponize social media, drones, 3D printing, and even biotech supply chains, where we get our vaccines and antibiotics. Then there is a second factor I would like to underline. The global supply chains of AI convergence allow for increasing proliferation of tools and tacit knowledge, the knowledge you need to produce those technologies, and for a lack of accountability. So we face a systems of what I call atomized responsibility, distributed agency. And we therefore need to focus on how the private sector will harness and regulate AI and converging technologies that have the potential to impact conflicts. We also need to monitor how certain political regimes will be able to co-opt these powerful capacities, these powerful private sector capacities. Then the third shift is the increasing permeability between military and civilian technologies, between military and civilian context. So the center of gravity for at least some conflict is shifting away from military forces towards critical cyber and biophysical infrastructure, political processes, and the social cohesion of targeted populations. So what is at stake is the power to use AI to manipulate and control the integrity of data and strategic intelligence within the functioning of countries' political processes, such as elections, economic infrastructures, and populations' bodies and minds. And I mean bodies and minds. I mean, think of AI system able to design deepfake simulations based on populations' biometrics, how we look like, to fuel ethnic violence and tensions. So in a nutshell, we face new forms of information warfare, what I call cognitive emotional conflicts. And the ultimate resilience of a nation lies in the minds of its citizens, whose capacity for trust in data, trust in elections, trust in emergency and governance systems is under constant pressure. So let me conclude by leaving you with two images, two scenarios of how AI convergence will change the nature of conflicts. One is what I call the deception machine. This scenario describes how AI convergence could simulate and control information, amplifying political and social manipulation to shape elections, in particular in the global south. Second, in the scenario I call the Internet of Bodies and Minds, the combination of AI and affective computing, facial recognition, affect recognition, creates the potential for biocontrol and surveillance of population on a large scale. And so the implications for human rights will influence what drives conflicts. To conclude, cyberspace is becoming a new battlefield for projecting or undermining normative influence. Tech-leading nations, such as the US and China, to some extent Russia, have entered an era of multipolar competition over who, in cyberspace, can impose national sovereignty and control access to converging technologies. Yet the major threat is for the Global South. Many states in the Global South do not have the power, influence, foresight, or incentive to shape responsible governance of AI and converging technologies away from weaponization. And so we sought foresight, we sought normative leadership, like the UN is supposed to provide. We may see emerging a new geopolitics of inequality and insecurity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eleonora. Michael, I would like to give you the floor now and speak about the rush to weaponize and how the superpowers in the world seem to be spending more and more money to improve their military and their arsenal. So please, Michael, over to you.
Does this work? Hello. Good morning, everyone. And first, I want to congratulate the Committee on Teaching about the UN for including this panel in your program today. As Eleanor indicated, the nature of war is changing, and therefore those of us who seek to prevent war and promote peace have to understand these changes and adapt ourselves accordingly, and this is really the cutting edge. So you should be congratulated for addressing these complicated issues. So to begin, I fear that we are at one of those extraordinary and dangerous moments in history when intensified competition among the great powers is coinciding with a rapid advance in technology. What often happens during such periods, and I fear is happening now, is that generals and policymakers rush to weaponize the new technologies and put them to the service of war without giving due consideration to the moral, ethical, and escalatory implications of doing so. We have seen this before. During World War I, the generals weaponized the newly burgeoning chemical industry to make poison gas. And it was only after the war, after hundreds of thousands of soldiers died or were poisoned from these gases, that the international community took steps to prohibit the use in war of chemical weapons. We saw this again during World War II, when the newly evolving technology of nuclear science was rapidly weaponized for the use in war without giving any thought to the long-term moral and escalatory consequences of doing so. It was only after the war that people stopped and thought, what should we do about this? And tried to come up with mechanisms to prevent the use and spread of nuclear weapons. And we made some progress in that direction with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is going to celebrate its 50th anniversary here at the United Nations in the coming months. It's a great accomplishment, but it's at risk. The UN has also adopted a ban on the use of nuclear weapons, but all countries have not signed it. So still, thousands of nuclear weapons remain in the arsenals of the major powers. And we're rushing now into the development of new technologies, and we have to see that in the context of a new great power rivalry, as you had before World War I and World War II, in this case with Russia, China, and the United States. And here, this is coinciding with rapid advances in artificial intelligence, as we've just heard, with hypersonic weapons, which are missiles that can fly more than 5 times the speed of sound, with robotics and autonomy and quantum computing. Like the chemical technologies of the World War I era and the nuclear technologies of World War II, these are dual-use technologies. That is, they could be used for both civilian and military purposes. Chemicals, of course, have many positive civilian uses, and the same is true of nuclear physics. And the same thing is true of artificial intelligence, robotics, and quantum computing. They can all make vital contributions to civilian life and medicine, commerce, and so on. But as we've heard, we have to be very, very careful about how these technologies are used in civilian life. And we have to be much more careful about their use for military purposes, especially as we see that the major powers are rapidly rushing these into military use. Of course, generals always are looking to take whatever technologies are available and weaponize them. That's normal. What makes this moment so worrisome is that the militaries of the US, Russia, and China and other countries are rushing to turn these into weapons without giving any careful consideration to their moral and escalatory consequences. And so you're seeing a technological arms race underway, akin to the nuclear and missile arms race of the Cold War era, except it's now in hypersonics, artificial intelligence, and robotics. And all the major powers are spending billions of dollars to build new weapons employing these technologies. This is what prevails in the allocation of funds in Washington, Moscow, and Beijing. We should be very worried about the potentially destabilizing and humanitarian consequences of employing these new technologies. I have two worries. First, that machines will be endowed with ever greater capacity to make decisions over human life and death. That arming robots or drones with a capacity to choose their victims using facial recognition technology and to kill them on their own without any further consultation with humans, possibly leading to unintended or rogue massacres of innocent civilians, while eliminating any moral responsibility for such heinous acts. It is for this reason that I support the campaign to stop killer robots. This is an organization you can look up. The campaign to stop killer robots is calling for an international treaty to prohibit the use of any machine in warfare that is not ultimately controlled by human beings. But I have a second, even greater worry, that the increased speed of warfare, which Eleanor has spoken about, involving the conjunction of hypersonic weapons, cyber warfare, space warfare, and artificial intelligence, will increase the temptation of militaries to rely on artificial intelligence to assess battlefield conditions and select military responses by themselves using algorithms built into the machines, up to including nuclear launch decisions. This may sound to some of you like science fiction movies. Maybe you remember Dr. Strangelove or War Games or The Terminator with their automated nuclear launch systems. But this is no longer science fiction. The U.S. military, and presumably Russia and China, are moving rapidly to automate their nuclear command and control systems, meaning the time may come in the not-too-distant future when machines and not humans make the ultimate decisions of planetary survival or annihilation. And given the military bias built into the machines, because the machines are only as smart as the programmers and the coders who build into them, given the military bias of the programmers, we can worry that they will likely have a preference for military rather than peaceful outcomes in the face of incoming messages that might be ambiguous. Machines have no capacity for mercy or for caution. I don't want to see that day happen. Yet at present, very little stands in its way, given the rush to automate these systems. So for this reason, I believe we need a campaign for a treaty or some other international instrument banning the total automation of nuclear command and control systems and require that humans alone make the fateful decision to use nuclear weapons. So to conclude, emerging technologies may have great promise for civilian life, but we should be very, very careful before we rush to employ them as war-making instruments without calculating all of the consequences of doing so. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for giving us a reality check in the dark possibilities that may come in the not-so-distant future if we don't change our ways. Adora, could you please take the floor and speak to us about the possibilities of emerging technologies and maybe the good side of what AI can bring after we've heard of a bit of the dark side from Michael, please.
We're going to solve all the problems right now here today, so you feel fortunate that you're here. I'm honored to be among you. I have goose pimples all over my body to see this room full of people who are here to talk about peace and about what the world is looking like going forward, given all of these extraordinary technological advances. Cora Weiss, you are a magnificent human being. At the risk of oversimplification, I want to talk about some big ideas, sort of big pictures, and I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts. You, me, everyone sitting in this room, we are living at an extraordinary period of time where the nature of converging technologies is nothing like we have seen before. So when I say that, what do I mean? We're talking about robotics, satellites, biosensors, advanced algorithms, 3D technology, the ability to make digital assets and people and place them in the real world and or to place them in a fake world. It is endless in terms of how we access those things. Many of you have smartphones in your pocket. You use fun little digital overlays on your pictures and you send them to one another. All the way through to many of the concerns that have just been expressed around what artificial intelligence can and is doing today and moving forward in terms of the disastrous applications. I liken all of these converging technologies to a big refrigerator. We all know that with flour, eggs, milk, and sugar, you can make all sorts of things. These technologies are exactly the same because they're made up of just basic technological advances, the ability for a device to see things, right? We have continually expanded and are developing the nature of what robotics are and what they can do. The point is that communication has always been and will always be a critical component of a technological advance. Many of you will ultimately be involved in discovering the best use cases for this technology. Most of it is really young, it's early. While they are the result of many decades of research, decades and centuries of research. They're still very new. AI, for example, is in its commercial use, relatively, we're a couple of years in. If we liken some of these technologies to a human being, and the average age is 78 years old, we're somewhere around 2 or 3 years old and truly understanding what the application of some of these technologies will be and what we will materially be using them for. There is one most important thing in my mind. People make technology. People make technology. People make technology, people use technology, people monitor technology. We get into this dynamic that somehow people who make technology are better and smarter than everyone else. That somehow maybe even the technology is making itself. Yes, artificial intelligence may one day mature to the point where it is similar to acting as the human brain. We are not there. We don't live in a Marvel movie, and we're not there. But we can make decisions about how we think about what this technology is and how it can be used. Every single one of us. Every single one of us. Because each of you will be in the business of using it in some capacity in your everyday work, right? And the monitoring of it and the development of where it's going is not solely dependent on those who code. Coding is critically important. All of us are never going to become coders. I'm never going to be a coder. I'm not. But I'm every day involved in this next generation of technology and the application of it. Subject matter experts. Each of you either are a subject matter expert or will become one, and will be using particular technological applications in every day that you are working. So I think we need to remember that we are empowered in ways that we are not necessarily thinking of it, to have some influence over how technology is used and how it's made. Okay, war. War is a terrible thing. I've spent a lot of time in war zones in Africa, Central Asia, the Middle East. We can argue about whether it's necessary. That's, I'm putting aside. But at the end of the day, people do terrible things to one another. And the cost is horrendous, and it lasts centuries. Technology is a tool. It can be used and will continue to be used by evildoers. Every tool that we've ever created, whether it's a shovel or artificial intelligence, has been used for good things and it's been used for bad things. And again, I don't seek to oversimplify any of these issues. They are big issues, and there are many, many, many questions, far more questions than we have answers to, sitting here today. But that doesn't mean that we don't ask those questions and we don't continue to engage in what that outcome might look like, and particularly the one that we want. 2 quick points about where we are. 2 good examples of good uses of technology today, right now. One is communication, right? Despite so many new technologies, the ones, some of which I've just mentioned, the simple ones sometimes are the best, and the access is growing at a fast clip every year. Pew researchers say 5 billion people have access to cell phones and or smartphones globally, and that's only growing. So what does that mean? We know that credible communication is key in mitigating conflict, perhaps preventing it, right? We know that rumors circulating result in untold numbers of deaths everywhere in many pockets of the world every year. The ability to have access to credible information is, we know, incredibly helpful. And that's a smartphone or a mobile phone. So that's incredibly important. Growing applications of all sorts to prevent rumor spreading, to provide credible information, and also to provide early warning to people who are in affected areas. Missiles, incoming, the ability to get out of the way, whether it's a natural disaster and or a human-led disaster. Those tools are becoming far more ubiquitous, and that's incredibly encouraging, and they're getting easier to access. The second thing is, that I think is also really important, is this notion of what diplomacy is about. Because we are not dealing in an environment where it's top-down technology, nobody's giving you a computer and saying, I don't care what you use it for. You could be a nurse, you can be an actor, you could be a surgeon. So much of these technologies, AI, AR, VR, the rest of it, is dependent upon the subject matter experts participating in its evolution. So what does that mean? That means it's not coming from one area in the world. There are pockets of people in every corner of the world where you have scientists, technologists, subject matter experts who are looking at this technology and trying to think about ways to apply it to materially better whatever it is endeavor that they are involved in. So those scientists are coming up with solutions. Telemedicine, key. We know when people are healthier, their communities are better, their infrastructures tend to be better, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here. Obviously, this is an exciting topic to me, all of these things, because there are tremendous applications in healthcare, access to medicine, various softwares and applications for agriculture, cleaning water, identifying pollutants, et cetera, et cetera. So you have these teams that are working together and collaborating in meaningful ways, which means you have a real diversity of thought that is going into applications that are more likely to work and more likely to better an environment and therefore mitigate the potential for conflict or even mitigate conflict itself. Again, I don't have rose-colored glasses on. I've been in Baghdad, spent a lot of time in Afghanistan and Pakistan. But I am tremendously encouraged, and I do see ways that technology can be used to truly impact communities and the world in a positive way. In a nutshell, all of us have an opportunity to influence and decide what this looks like. I love this quote from the renowned British actor Helen Mirren when she says, "You," and I say we, "write our life story by the choices we make." We have a choice. We have a choice. It is not too late. We have a choice to decide that we are going to engage vigorously and relentlessly with this conversation around what technology is, how we apply it, and how we can responsibly direct at least some, if not many, efforts towards improving the world we live in. Thank you.
I'm going to ask the panel a couple of questions, but I would like to open the floor up to you all, since you've come all the way here. So you can ask a few questions, and once the panel have asked a question or two from my end, can you please press the mic button, and I'll acknowledge you. And if you could keep your question very precise, and if it's directed to a specific panelist, could you mention who you're directing your question to, and just try and keep it concise because we don't have much time. I thank you all once again. I like how this panel was set up. Not intentionally, we had AI and then speaking of war, and someone who brought it back home speaking on both sides of the coin of new technologies and AI, and I think that's very important. Michael, I'd like to pose the question to you. We see, as you've mentioned, governments speeding up and using more and more funds to build their armies and their arsenals, and you spoke about the moral side of it. And the UN was based on a human moral backbone. Where have we gone wrong, and why are governments continuing to spend this? Is their argument of security for our country the best argument out there?
I think... Mike, I'm sorry. Gives me a minute to collect my thoughts. As I said, I think we're at a particular moment. After the Cold War, we had some breathing space. There was time to think of new possibilities, of new means of international cooperation, and I felt this was a hopeful moment. I think that period has now ended, and we're in a period now of intensified competition and rivalry between the major armed powers, and they are increasingly turning to nuclear weapons as part of their arsenal. So we have to think about the global context, and it's in this context of increased rivalry and competition that some of the restraints that people might have used in the past, moral restraints, are being pushed aside, and the rush to field new weapons on the battlefield. So it is the political context. So I think we really have to see how could we slow down and reduce the intensity of international conflict and hostility. That's really the peace mission of today.
All right, thank you. I see you've got one microphone on. You have a question, sir? Yes. Please, thank you.
Thank you very much. A very great historian once described, I think, history as a race between education and catastrophe. And for this conference, it's important. How do we deal with this challenge that the new technologies, internet, and the exponential increase of the efforts to raise the lie as a political tool? How do we confront that? We have a president of this country, of the United States now, who has adopted basically a policy that occurred during the rise of Germany in the 30s, that you can tell a lie over and over again and eventually people will believe it. And this type of fake information and news is all over the planet at the moment, and now it's going to attack us with dealing with this virus. So I'm wondering what the experts in terms of peace think education needs to do to try and address this challenge. Thank you.
Does anyone want to answer the question briefly?
So, you know, the way I see this convergence of technologies we are facing, it's much more than a tech revolution. It's an epistemic, social and political revolution. So what you have to understand is that the convergence of those technologies with our data, and our data are ourselves, we are the new product of this tech model, means that we are the source of information, we are, to some extent, the product used by the business model of those new technologies. And so I think what we need to think about is really about empowerment. How can we create mechanisms of resistance, pockets of resistance, to think about how to reshape the business model of converging technologies so that it's not about commodification of data, social and political manipulation, but it's about empowerment. So AI and genomics for precision medicine, for conflict prevention, for promoting friendship over hate speech. The data that big tech companies collect about ourselves are used for inflaming tensions, ethnic tensions, racial divisions during elections. So we need to think about how to revert the business model. Then we also, I think the UN is in a unique position to promote normative leadership in this space and to engage with the private sector to shape that business model towards empowerment. In terms of education, I spent the last 10 years working with youth, with students, in what we call citizen science spaces. So, labs, places where youth students are learning about not just how to code, but how to understand AI, how to understand our biology. I met a young girl in San Francisco who was trying to cure the disease of her brother by really finding which proteins she can work on to develop a treatment. If the youth, if our next generation try to learn enough and own, to some extent, the tools of this next revolution, we can create more resistance, more understanding, more resistance, more ownership. So I have a lot of hope in that space.
Thank you. I'm so sorry I saw there's one question, but we've run out of time. Ladies and gentlemen, I encourage you to please, if you can, Google this panel over here. I didn't give them enough justice for all the work they've done. Google their work, the books they've written, the articles they've authored, and you can have a deeper understanding. I'd like to thank you all once again for coming and for speaking on such an interesting topic and one which definitely affects the lives of people here and abroad. Ladies and gentlemen, the panel, thank you.
Okay, we're ready. It's now over 2 decades since CTAUN began its journey of developing a format to assist teachers and educators in understanding the origin of the UN, its contributions, and where it stands on policy in the world. Our annual conference is guided by topics that flow through the UN Charter to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. During the planning of our topics, we open it up and we invite educators from grade K through university level to submit what they think might have been a best practice and what worked successfully in their classroom. This year, in honor of the 75th anniversary, our Excellence in Education Award and recipients all submitted a project addressing the topics aiming for peace. A summary of their projects will be up on our website in the near future, but for now, I would like to introduce them and ask them to receive their award. Okay. Eleanor Skolnick, former City of New York teacher and currently adjunct at Adelphi College on Long Island, where she works with international student teachers. And her topic was, what was your topic?
It was multicultural education, the road to peace and tolerance.
Okay, thank you. Second, we have Mehdi Rezdi from Tunisia. His topic was Tea Talk. I love the topic. Cross-cultural understanding to think critically about the phenomenon of war. And lastly, we have Truique Buchholz. I don't know if she made it in. The last I received the message, she was outside trying to get in. Is she here? Oh. Okay. Oh. All right. And these are our awardees for 2020 War No More. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us and for bucking the trend and coming to school on a Friday. I got here this morning by an Uber, and when I tried to put in the request for the Uber on the app, I got a message saying you've been approved as an Uber driver. Now, that's probably a story for the last panel. But I did want to share that with you because one of the benefits of that ride was that in the car, the very nice driver had a station that was playing Bob Dylan. And the particular song that was being played was one which had the lyric, "Don't try and change what you can't understand." And it occurred to me that so much of, and I'm going to return to this idea of anger later, that so much of the anger that we find in schools, in colleges, whether among students or teachers today, is in many ways emotional. It reacts, but it's not often based upon an understanding of what the issues we are angry about are. And that's why I was so excited when Anne-Marie asked me to be the facilitator for this particular panel, because we have two wonderful minds here, Yoon-hee and Tony, and you've got their bios in your material with you, to discuss the question in the phrase of the program, peace, education, and transformative education. And that led me to think, is peace education itself the transformative education that we need? And that's the first question that I'm going to pose to our two experts. So maybe I'll start with Yoon-hee, please.
Thank you so much for the introduction. You're asking about transformative education. Well, I would like to start with my experience first, because the word transformative, I don't know if how you perceive the transformative aspect of the education. Is here anybody who came here through Grand Central today? Many of you? Okay, very good. I have some story because that's the station I always use. Also, here are many youth, but not only youth, but also many generation, I believe they love, I don't know, if you say yes, then you might be very modernized citizen. Do you know BTS? Yes? Okay, so I can see they're young. So I'm not teenager or even 20 or 30. I'm going to be soon to be 50s. But what's that? But I think the transformative education, if everybody in the world become a fan of the BTS, will be done. There is a reason. So let me tell you about this. BTS, what they are so popular is about, maybe if it's an ARMY, it's a BTS band group name, ARMY is here, you may understand, or if I'm wrong, please correct me. What they are paying attention to is identify yourself, who you are, why you are living for in this world. They are asking those questions and they are share their empathy with those people. I have a big fan right here, nodding her head. So then because of the many of this positive message of encouraging people to love yourself and then see others in your own eyes and then be yourself in others' perspective as well. So it becomes very much a phenomena of young people and also those army groups who follow this BTS become a very peaceful and positive force around the world. Here's a story in the Grand Central. I every day pass by Grand Central, and there was I would not say a certain ethnicity group, but there is a homeless person who are in a wheelchair. Some of you might have met him. He doesn't look like me, doesn't look like anybody else, but look like some of you. I'm talking about different color of person. I was passing by the Grand Central, and then all of a sudden, lots of noise coming up. The reason was because this disabled homeless person was eating bread, but all of a sudden, very young man who looked different from that homeless person pour water, milk, on top of his head. Oh my God, I was just passing by. My heart was pumping. But guess what I did? I just kept going on, pass. In the meantime, I was thinking, what is this phenomena? Why these things happening? I never seen before certain administration change in the US. Then I was trying to analyze the phenomena, why this kind of hatred or conflict is happening in individual life. Then please let me know at the end. I will tell you what I did later. First, I just passed. And here is the concept of peace, by the way. Peace in the dictionary says is the normal condition of society and people in relations in perfect harmony. Normal condition, no non-warring condition. So when you talk about no war, you can say, oh, then that it means exactly peace. But what if what is the perfect harmony in personal relations? Here is a concept. In transformative education, what we try to do is we try to change or transform people's mindset in a way they are aware of themselves, who they are, why they are living in that society in relation to the global phenomena. You yourself has a meaning to live, but when you are living, you have to be aware of the relations with others. That's empathy. When you see some poor or some very tragic issue, you feel something. That's empathy. But furthermore, compassion. Compassion, simply speaking, suffer together. Suffer together, that drives you to feel like motivated to do something, to reduce the suffer. If you see people in their eyes and in their position, you can feel more empathy, and then you can feel you want to do something for it. Having that mindset, attitude, you want to find out what caused this kind of conflict between people, where it could be society, then try to see the information involved in certain conflict situation. Not just information itself, but background. What is the cultural, political, historical, social, economic background of this issue? That's knowledge elements. Then finally, you want to do something, not by yourself, alone, together, solidarity, cooperation, so that you can see better humanity in your own neighbor, in the whole world. That's transformative education. In transformative education, briefly speaking, I talked about awareness of yourself, an attitude of empathy and compassion, knowledge involved in that issue and agenda, and then skill, how you're going to solve the issues together. Then you want to see the humanity. That's transformative education. You want to make your mindset to be more compassionate, respectful, and cooperative. Also, in other words, we say this is also global citizenship education's goal. So let me get back to my first experience. The Grand Central. Do you know what I did? I keep changing my idea. Instead of seeing the situation and analyzing it, I put myself into the homeless guy's position, sitting in the chair getting the milk on top of my head. Then I moved, came back, went to the neighbor's door, got the tissues, and then wiped him up, and then tried to ask what he needs, and try to make him feel we are together in this society. This little bit of action, I think, it will promote more peaceful relations of the society, and then furthermore, it can make better humanity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Yuni, for also demonstrating the possibility of education outside the classroom. Thank you for that. Joni?
Yeah, and I want to comment and thank you, Yuni, for sharing that personal story. One of the things that I always invite educators to think about is their own paths to change and transformation as a way of beginning to understand and the ways in which we need to begin to facilitate that kind of learning for others. Like the other speakers before me, I'm getting goosebumps and sort of this sense of awe and being in a room full with students and teachers who have the courage to speak up and talk about peace in a world which often seems like it is certainly not interested in it. Just a couple of days ago, I read a really fascinating report that examined from 2018 to 2019 in the U.S. We've seen the highest rates of civil resistance that we've seen in 30-plus years. An interesting part of that, of the sort of formal organized strikes and walkouts that were organized by unions and others, 90% of those were led by teachers, right? And not just for better pay. I mean, yes, you deserve that, right? But they were out there on the streets for better conditions for their students, a better future for their students. And the students, we have these wonderful, courageous young leaders. We have the Malalas, we have the Gretas, and they're beautiful. But then we have the nameless, faceless few that probably you aren't even aware of this. Last week in Congress, a group of young students occupied the halls, calling for action for climate change. These are the new adults in the room, reminding them of their obligation for the future. When our children have to tell us that, it's inspiring, but it also shows us there's a big, deep problem in the way that we think, the way that we go about this work. So in the immortal words of Cora Weiss, teachers, students, you, my dears, are what's right with the world, right? So I want to start maybe in trying to identify what the problem is, what needs to be transformed. And there's a lot of things here. There's obviously a political, a structural, a kind of institutional dimension that we need to empower our students to transform. And then there's a very deeply personal one, as Uni has pointed out. So, here in the halls of this institution, which is all about abolishing war, within this UN community, despite many of our best efforts, obviously, to shift from things like state security to human security, to nurture cultures of peace, to promote nonviolence, military intervention still remains the prevailing modus operandi of our political decision makers, right? So one of the things that really needs transforming are these institutions and spaces for political decision making and the institutions that we use and design for managing conflicts. But let's also be really clear, it's bigger than just an institutional problem. Militarism, right, pervades our thinking about security, about what makes us secure. And this is the kind of thinking that trickles down into the policing practices of many of our communities around the world, especially here in the U.S. We have this kind of thinking complemented by waves and waves of structural and cultural violence. And in this room, I know there's a lot of U.S. teachers. In this country, an unarmed black man is 5 times as likely as an unarmed white man to be shot and killed by a police officer. 1 in 3 black males in this country will go to jail at some point in their lifetime. We have a school-to-prison pipeline. And seeing the heads nod and acknowledge that reality in this room shows to me how deeply normalized this is. They don't even have to explain what that is to you. So let's add to the long list of problems a lot of other things: gender violence, the ever-increasing wealth gap, environmental conflict, and on and on. And you see all this all fits together. You can't separate it. There is a culture of violence that we need to address, and that resides a lot of it up here in the mind. So it seems to me that education, not just peace education, but all education, should be oriented to address and transform this problem. So as educators in this room, I think it's really important that we acknowledge that all the education that we're a part of has some kind of social, it has some kind of political purpose. What that learning, what the curricula intends to contribute to the world that we're in. Sometimes those purposes are pretty explicit. Quite often they're hidden. We're unaware of them. Many educators are unconscious of those realities. Most quote-unquote standard curricula, standard teaching is developed to help students, help them navigate the world as it is, right? Right, to find a job, to join the economy, to participate in the political systems that exist. And this sort of standard curricula, it emphasizes things like reproducing and sharing knowledge. And pedagogically, these standards approach is sort of emphasize a transference of knowledge from the student, from the teacher to the student, a one-way process of education, right? What the teacher knows is what matters. The teacher is the authority. But peace education, as transformative education, is concerned with preparing students to construct a more peaceful and preferred world, right? Not just to be in the world as it is. So I believe, similar to what Uni has said, that the social and the political purposes of peace education, and all education for that matter, should be to acquire the knowledge, to develop the skills, to nurture the attitudes, and build those capacities in our students that are necessary for human well-being, for flourishing, and the achievement of a culture of peace. And because education is a political task, I would add to this that our task in transformative education is to find ways to nurture the political efficacy needed to take political action, to take change, to stop ourselves in our track and to say, I need to do something different the next time I see that, the next time I encounter that, to develop that political will. So nurturing these changes is not, a simple pedagogical task. It requires a lot more than simply informing people what to think. Rather, it's a process of forming and transforming. There's a lot that's stacked against us. We have these worldview obstacles that peace education confronts. Militarism, patriarchy has been mentioned, materialism, racism. These violent worldviews are often reproduced in our educational institutions, obviously in our politics, in our families. And obviously, this is the focus, of the work of global citizenship education. It's the focus of the culture of peace work pursued here in the UN and in UNESCO, which those programs call for nothing short of a broad paradigm shift in our societies, and we need to live up to that. Transformative education, particularly with adults, it seeks to help us challenge the worldview assumptions we have about the way the world works, but it's not only a cognitive process, right? It's also action-oriented. It's encouraging us to change our habits about how we interact with the world and those around us. So what does this learning look like, right? Well, it's quite a bit different than the standard approach. Yes, we have to do really important things like help our students acquire the skills, the knowledge of peace building, doing the empathy work, cultural exchanges, perspective taking, providing experiences of cooperation, these sorts of hands-on experiences that are essential for doing the constructive political change work that's important. But it is also, and especially, it requires us to put students at the very center of the learning, right? It starts by acknowledging the student's experience of the world, asking what matters to them. It has to start here if it's going to be meaningful for the student. It invites them then to critically think about the world that they're in and their role in it, right? So transformative learning relies on and fosters self-reflection, contemplation, rumination. It's a kind of creative thinking that invites learners to think about the future, particularly the future that they desire, and to begin modeling, experimenting, and testing and building that world.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Tony. Thank you for that. I'm just going to pose one more question to both of you, and I'd ask that your responses be as brief as possible, because we've really learned a lot from the lead question. Tony spoke about formative and transformative education, and I wanted to ask you, Uni, we had a very warm comment this morning by Ambassador Cho of the Republic of Korea, saying that Korea is the symbol of war no more. And I wondered how much in the curriculum of transformative education would a traditional discipline like history be? Bob Scott, the president emeritus of Adelphi University, once said that without history you cannot tell the distinction between can't and can't. So in that spirit, what is history as a discipline? What's its relevance to transformative education?
History of transformative. Okay, thank you so much for the question. I will try to be brief. By the way, we are saying transformative education these days. Also, in the meantime, Tony and I mentioned global citizenship education. But history, if I have to talk about history, it can go back to even at the beginning of the United Nations Charter. It started with the United Nations, the people. And they are encouraging understanding and respect of each state, and then work together in equal state and solve the problem for the better humanity. From that time, education sector has been emphasizing on working together and then communicating with each other. More importantly, 1965, there is a declaration, UN General Assembly Declaration about youth and children. The declaration is emphasizing on the exchange of spirit of youth, their mindset, thinking that will promote the peace of the world. At the time, also followed by UNESCO in 2000, late 20th century, they were emphasizing intercultural education. Intercultural education emphasized on intercultural competence. That is also core competency of global citizen. Currently, we are talking about global citizenship education. So intercultural competence means the ability to communicate, collaborate with people from different background, culture, and country effectively and appropriately to solve issues through the critical thinking and creative ideas. That is all based on understanding and respect toward each other's identity. So that has been intercultural competence. So why intercultural competence become core of the global citizenship education and also all those things we can call transformative education? It is all about identifying yourself, who you are, what is the important value in your life, why you are living in this world for, and then putting yourself into the society and community and the global phenomena. You feel responsible. And it is all about sense of humanity in a way I feel, as others feel. There is a book saying Anatomy of Peace. There is a heart of peace is to see others as people, not as object. Then peace can start from there. So global citizenship education emphasizing on people, empathy, compassion, respect, working together, solidarity, right? For the better world of whole humanity. So it can be all the history of the transformative education, basically as individuals transform their mindset, they can contribute to the better society. That could be the key. Thank you.
Thank you, Uni. Thank you. You know, last evening, Thursday evening, Secretary General Antonio Guterres spoke at the New School downtown on gender issues. And he had a quote from a work 3,000 years old, Homer's Odyssey, where one of the characters, Telemachus, tells his mother, Penelope, "Be quiet when men talk, your views are not important." And Mr. Guterres says, unfortunately, many of his interlocutors today are very similar to Telemachus. I wonder, Tony, what is the gender component to peace education or transformative education?
Oh, I wasn't prepared that question would be asked, but I'm glad you brought it. Boy, can I get a second to get my thoughts together on that? The gender component. Well, you know, fundamentally, is we had this wonderful speech just a few minutes ago by tremendous feminist peace activists that really inspired me, between Gloria and Lemon, and they mentioned the importance of understanding how gender equity is this fundamental marker for understanding and the kind of the greatest predictor for peacefulness of a particular society, right? Not just how that country is going to behave internally in terms of its policies and practice, but how it's going to engage in the rest of the global community. So fundamentally, peace education is about dismantling the system of patriarchy, first and foremost. You know, understanding, helping students to kind of critically understand and interpret that power pyramid of patriarchy, where men and their kind of possession and control of power and the structure of the system is at the top, and here, very down at the bottom, are women, trans women of color, who are the most oppressed by that reality. So part of it is helping to develop an awareness of that system. Part of it is challenging the thinking that sustains young men's beliefs about how they interact and engage with the world. But there's no way we can begin to approach peace if, again, half the world's population is not at the table in the decision-making circles and processes. It can't begin that way.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you for introducing that concept of patriarchy. Earlier this morning, Anne-Marie spoke very eloquently about the history of this chamber and of the concept of trusteeship, which initially in the United Nations was in many ways an expression of patriarchy, the larger countries holding smaller emerging nations as trustees. But I think now that we're in this chamber, it's good for all of us to reflect upon a couple of things. First, the new trusteeship in the United Nations. This wonderful poster that all of you have in your kits by Kate Kollwitz. Kate Kollwitz once wrote, "Where do all these women find the courage to send their dear ones to the front, to face the guns, when they have watched over them and their lives with such loving care?" That, I think, is true of the United Nations as well. Where do the 193 member states of this organization find the courage to send their daughters and sons to war when they, as governments, and this as the United Nations, have tried to hold them in trusteeship with such loving care? And I think if we reflect upon that, we realize the one element that our two very well-behaved panelists did not display: anger, even though their narratives were filled with anger, whether the man at Grand Central Station or the policies that Tony talked about in educational institutions which demand to be changed. I began with Bob Dylan. I'll end with a quote of his: "I was older then, I'm younger now." And that's true, I think, of all of us in this room, because as we grow, we get more angry. But we also see there is a channel for that anger. And no one really represents that better than our awardee today, Cora Weiss. And so I will, in United Nations fashion, leave you with an acronym for Cora: the concentration of real anger. Thank you, Cora. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Do you want me to just start in? Thank you to our chairperson, Anne-Marie Carlson, and our distinguished presenters, and each one of you participants. We have with us today, this afternoon actually, we have with us today a group of students who have taken many of these ideas and feelings that we have been having in our minds and our hearts this morning, and have expressed them in a group of very creative and wonderful posters, brilliant posters. Some of them are stark, some of them are beautiful but sad, some of them are shocking. And you saw some of those posters displayed on a rolling PowerPoint when you came in this morning. They're also set up on easels on display in the corridor in 1B for you to have a look at during the lunchtime. And also some of the students, many of the students who created them, will be there to discuss their posters with you. Now, I'm not going to bring all the students up here right now. I'm just going to note that they are from Florida A&M University, University of Texas in Austin, the Ram Manohar Lohia National Law College in India, Mount Kenya University in Kenya, Raritan Valley Community College in New Jersey, the University of Bridgeport, Montclair State University, and Balasore Arts and Crafts College in India. And I would like to ask, yes, thank you. I would like to ask, hold on a second. I'd like to ask the students who created the posters and who are present here today to please rise, and let's show our appreciation to them. And let me commend each of them in this fashion. They will receive a certificate. This is to recognize you in recognition of your role as a poster session presenter at the Committee on Teaching about the United Nations Conference, War No More,
which took place in the United Nations headquarters in New York on February 28, 2020. Thank you to each of our creators and presenters. Thank you, Anne-Marie.
And thank you so much, Bill Lay, for organizing this and getting such great posters representing our topic, War No More. But now, all of you have to go down to level 1B. The elevator can take you right down to 1B. See our info fair exhibit tables, because we have, I think it's almost 20 info fair exhibits set up there. And then look at the corridor just to the right of that, and you'll see all of those posters with their creators standing next to them, ready to explain their work and how they got that inspiration. And of course, you'll need some lunch during this approximately 2-hour break, and that you can have either in the Viennese Cafe, which is right next to where all the exhibits are, or in the Visitors Cafe, which is a little further to the side, but it's over by the UN bookstore, and you got those coupons to use there too. So that's the assignment for the next 2 hours, and we hope you will enjoy all your visits, and we'll see you back here close to 2:15. We're starting again for the afternoon then. Enjoy.